and welcome to the January 2022 Lady Justice Women of the Court podcast. On this episode, the Lady Justices will discuss treatment courts.
Drug court teaches all its participants that the only things we can ever truly possess are those things which we cherish and give away with love, including our precious time and talent. And in the end, we are made worthy of the long-promised blessings reserved for those who do justice and show mercy.
Treatment courts are also known as problem-solving courts. These courts provide programming designed to address the underlying issues that bring an individual into the justice system. Many utilize specialized dockets, multidisciplinary teams, and a non-adversarial approach. By offering evidence-based treatment, judicial supervision, and accountability, treatment courts provide individualized interventions for participants, thereby improving public safety, reducing recidivism, restoring lives, and promoting confidence and satisfaction with the justice system. That's coming up. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to Lady Justice Women of the Court. I'm Justice Beth Walker of the Supreme Court of Appeals of West Virginia, and I'm your host for this episode. I'm joined, as always, by my friends, Michigan Chief Justice Bridget McCormick and Arkansas Justice Rhonda Wood. This is the first episode we're taping in calendar year 2022, and I'm so grateful to get to talk to you two again. And before we get started on our official topic, let me ask you whether you are New Year's resolution people. And if you are, how's it going? And if not, how is 2022 kicking off for you generally? Rhonda, how about you get started?
So it's good to see you both. It's like the highlight of my year so far, I think, that it says a lot about 2022. So I am a New Year's resolution person, but this year my resolution was to not make a resolution. So I just was not going to put any extra pressure on myself this year. And so that was part of my goal, is to sort of limit any sort of extra pressure. So that's my resolution, is no resolutions. So what about you, Bridget?
I'm not really a New Year's resolution person, but I am. I do spend a lot of time trying to build new habits and unlearn old habits, so much so, and I've actually been reading a bunch of books about that and some research about it, and TED Talks, because sometimes you just want to get it all really quickly. And so I did start a couple of new daily habits in December. I like to get a jump on the new year, but and they're all sort of related, taking stress away and giving yourself a break. So I feel your resolution around it, but I've been now 55 days in a row of walking at least 1 mile outside. So being completely unplugged. And getting the fresh air, no matter the temperature or if there's rain. There was one day when I was in Nashville for a couple of days for a board meeting, it was pouring, and I kept waiting for a break in the rain and it wasn't going to come. So I just did my mile walk in the rain. And we've had some pretty cold ones in Michigan the last few weeks. But at 1 mile every day, unplugged, just for fresh air and kind of mental health preservation. In addition to that, I did this 40-day personal yoga challenge with a personalized yoga video made by a friend of mine who's a wonderful yoga teacher. And I did it 40 days in a row, exactly the same time every morning. Also, just to kind of give my brain a reset each day. How about you, Beth?
Well, I am... I like New Year's resolutions, but I don't have a long history of sticking with them. And as you guys know, I've been on sort of a health crusade generally for the past couple of years. So I try not to limit it just to New Year's. But on the topic you raised, Bridget, I'm sure you've read How to Change by Katie Milkman. That's on my Audible right now. So interesting in this whole topic of habits and how you sort of shift the way you think about changing. But I've added to my morning, of course, I've mentioned before, I do 20 minutes of meditation / prayer in the morning. So I've tacked on to that, which is a thing. You can habit stack to try to start new habits. And so I've tacked onto that 5 minutes of writing. I don't call it journaling. I have always been intimidated by the prospect of journaling, but I have a little thing and I write just for 5 minutes, whatever I'm thinking, and then I put it down. So I just stacked it on there, and that's my new habit, or at least one new habit for 2022. So, I continue on my well-being theme, I guess.
Yeah, stacking habits is the main advice I'm reading, and it does help, right? If there's something you already do every day, to then just train yourself to do one more thing right after it, or one more thing doing it. So like, you brush your teeth every day, at least twice a day, if maybe sometimes more. If you want to work on balance, stand on one leg in the morning the whole time you brush your teeth, and the other leg at night the whole time you brush your teeth. Anyway, just, yeah, habit stacking is kind of awesome.
Okay, I love you guys. You guys are just like motivating me now. Now you're making me want to change. I'm going to break my resolution. What is it? January 24th. I'm going to break my resolution and maybe make a resolution.
Don't call it a resolution. Just call it a thing to do. Try a new habit. I'll send you the name of this book. It's pretty interesting. There's a ton of science, which is what Bridget was talking about, on this whole behavioral health. I mean, there's a lot of self-help out there too, but there's a lot of really good, like, science-based, evidence-based stuff. And it actually, as it turns out, it works. So that was fun. Okay. So we are going to talk today about some important work that happens in our state courts, but doesn't get appealed to us at our state Supreme Courts. As we've talked about a number of times, state courts all operate differently, and we'll talk about how each of ours does in this area in a little bit. And they're also great places for innovation. Things can happen at the state level, sometimes more quickly or more easily than they can in the federal system. So a perfect example of something that started out in state courts are things that we call treatment courts. That's our topic for today. According to my extensive research, the first drug court was actually started in New York in 1974. And these programs go by a lot of different names, and we'll talk about kind of how they're all different, but every state calls them slightly differently. They're called treatment courts, or specialty courts, or sometimes problem-solving courts, adult drug courts, juvenile drug courts, family treatment courts, which are a little bit newer, veterans courts, DWI courts, and mental health courts, just to name a few. Now, when I was elected, I'd heard of these courts, but honestly didn't really know what they were or how they worked, because my work as a lawyer, as I've talked about, was not in criminal. So our goal today is just to educate folks about what these programs are and how they operate in all of our states. And what they all have in common, regardless of their names, is that they are a structured program to help people with addiction or mental health challenges start to overcome those challenges once they become involved in the court system. For example, you could have an adult facing nonviolent criminal charges who could qualify to participate in an adult drug court instead of going to jail. So that sort of creates motivation that's sometimes necessary in some kinds of addiction treatment. And so you want to motivate that person to address their addiction that put them in the situation to commit a crime in the first place. And so when these started, treatment courts met with opposition, as you might expect, but over the years, they've established themselves as evidence-based and successful at what they do. So with that introduction, let's start the discussion. As I mentioned, I didn't know anything about treatment courts, or very little, when I was elected. How about you two? Were you familiar with drug courts, and did that affect your interest in being a justice? Let's start with Bridget.
Yeah, well, thanks for taking on this topic, Beth. I think it's such an important one for folks to understand. State courts do so many different kinds of things, and the work that they're doing across the country, actually internationally even, in treatment courts is among the best of the best, I think. I was familiar with treatment courts because I did some indigent criminal practice throughout my entire time as a lawyer and a faculty member. I started my career as a public defender in New York City in 1991. treatment courts were not common at that time, even though, as you note, the first one was founded some 15 years or so before that. It was not a common thing in the way, or as common as it is now. And in my view, frankly, it should be even more common because we now have so much data about the success of these courts, not just in reducing recidivism, but also in ensuring that the folks who graduate from them are contributing to society. They're usually employed when they finish. And so there now are some really interesting economic studies on cost savings as a result of treatment courts. But I know we're going to keep going on. So let me see about Rhonda. What was your experience with treatment courts before you were on the Supreme Court?
And I guess to kind of explain to Arkansas, on our trial courts, some states I know have it where the trial courts, you just do like family law, or you just do civil, or you just do juvenile law. Our trial courts were general jurisdiction. And so what I handled was civil, criminal, and juvenile. But I had probably a year after I took the bench, the legislature created 13 juvenile drug courts, funded them in Arkansas. And that would have been about 2008. And so I applied and received one of the first 13 juvenile drug courts. So I ran one, and I had not ever practiced juvenile law really, and had an experience of that. I was, a law professor, taught health law, but it was fascinating to me. And especially the juvenile drug court side, you see juveniles and hear about them picked up for, possession and drug use at, 16, 17. And it was startling for me to hear that, they really started with their substance abuse at, 9 or 10, 11, and then it developed to more serious drugs, by 16, 17. And so the drug court, for people that don't understand that or haven't been exposed to it, it's really not just about, with juveniles, we don't really want to just incarcerate them as sort of a punishment. Juveniles don't learn that way. If you've raised teenagers, that they don't really respond well. It backfires. The way is sort of to replace what that's doing to their brain. And so with the drugs, they're used to getting either the high or the low. And so you have to sort of figure out something that's going to, if they're taking drugs to get high, something that's going to replace the endorphins to get the endorphin level high in place of drugs. So a lot of times it was sort of teaching them and exposing them to working out. Like we talk a lot about exercise here, to how to get that endorphin level and get that high naturally, and develop positive habits. And so that was a lot of what was really interesting to me. I had to learn a lot by, presiding over at a drug court. Beth, I know you want to talk a lot about how they're set up too. So I'll pass it back to you.
Well, yeah, great. And we'll kind of sprinkle in, we didn't talk about this specifically before we started, and I had an inkling you might have been a drug court judge, Rhonda, but I wasn't sure. So that's, you come at this with the practical knowledge, which is awesome. But I do want to cover real quick how they're set up. And as a review, for example, West Virginia is a unified court system. So that means our Supreme Court supervises all of the levels of courts. And so we oversee the operation of all the treatment courts in our state, including the rules and the administration of, and there's a lot of state and federal grants normally, as Rhonda referenced actually, that are associated with getting these programs particularly up and running. And that's one of the challenges, because then once those grants run out, you, of course, have to be good advocates for the legislature to continue to fund them. Our legislature has come around to be fans of drug courts and treatment courts and family treatment courts. So it's been a great partnership. As a practical matter, the supervision of the day-to-day operation of these courts happens by one of the administrative offices in our court. As a practical matter, that supervision happens by a division of our Supreme Court, the probation division. Not every state oversees probation officers, but ours does, and that's where the supervision of the drug courts happen. In West Virginia, we have 29 adult drug courts that include veterans courts, and they serve 46 of our 55 counties, 15 juvenile drug courts serving 22 counties, and 10 family treatment courts serving 13 counties. Now, how about Arkansas, Rhonda? Does your court supervise treatment courts?
Yes, so we are decentralized. We're not unified, but each judicial circuit has to submit an administrative plan to the court, and how they are going to distribute their docket. And if they're going to want to do, we call them specialty courts, then we have to approve them for them to be set up. And so what we have, and then our court has a specialty courts program coordinator, and then an advisory committee that sort of evaluates and does annual reviews of all the courts, specialty courts. But we have 49 adult drug courts, 16 juvenile drug courts, 14 DWI courts. We have 5 Hope and Swift courts that are for high-risk probationers. We have 16 veteran courts, 5 alternative sentencing courts, 2 family treatment courts, and 2 mental health courts. And I believe it's about 75% of Arkansas counties are covered by some sort of specialty court. So Bridget, how about Michigan?
Pretty similar to both of you. The Michigan Supreme Court has constitutional administrative oversight of all the courts of the state. So even though it's a disunified system, we provide a lot of guidance, training, support to the trial courts and the treatment courts in particular. The legislature funds about $17 million for treatment courts every year, and we at the State Court Administrative Office of the Michigan Supreme Court review grant applications for that funding every year. We also provide a lot of training and guidance, best practices, and we certify our treatment courts. There's also a data collection and presentation that we do every year. So we help the local courts analyze and understand the data that's coming out of those programs, which is really effective in continuing to get funding for them. We have 135 drug and sobriety courts. Those are adult drug treatment courts, DWI courts, family dependency treatment courts, juvenile drug treatment courts, and tribal healing to wellness courts. We have a number of our tribes in Michigan have wonderful treatment courts, and a couple of the tribes that have a lot of resources will also take people charged in the local state court into their tribal treatment court. And they just provide the services there, and then the state court can dismiss the case if they succeed. We also have 37 mental health treatment courts, 31 adult, 6 juvenile, and 27 veterans treatment courts, which I think is more than any other state in the country. So it's a big number. Everybody in Michigan can have access to a treatment court if they qualify for it. That doesn't mean that there are enough spots for everybody. That's a different question.
Wow, that's fantastic to hear all of the services available in Michigan, and inspiring too. You all have clearly made it a priority, but it does touch on this issue of who runs these. So the basic setup of these courts, and they vary depending on the kind of folks they're serving, but they serve under the supervision of a judge, and there's normally a team of people, including a prosecutor, and other folks. But the key part of these programs usually is there is a judge involved, because again, we're motivating people to make significant changes in their life. And a judge is a person of authority, first of all, and the judge will make the decision about whether, if there's criminal repercussions or civil repercussions regarding families, the judge is going to decide. So the judge is a key person in these courts. Who are the treatment court judges in your states, and do they volunteer for this work, or are they assigned? And I'm going to pass it back to you, Bridget, for Michigan.
Yeah, in Michigan, they volunteer, and we often have more volunteers than we have funding for, and so that's an ongoing an ongoing issue. You know, I think given all of the data we now have coming out of treatment courts, there is a pretty shared sense across all three branches of government and throughout the judiciary that treatment courts shouldn't just be kind of the cherry on top of the criminal legal system. They should maybe just be the mode of how we handle a lot of cases in the criminal legal system. Obviously not all, but an awful lot are probably eligible for the methodology that we use in treatment courts. So we have more judges volunteering to run treatment courts than we have funding for treatment courts. And I think that's a pretty great sign about the judiciary and how the judges across the state view their jobs. So I would worry if we were in a position where we had to recruit people. It's a lot of extra work. I mean, being a treatment court judge is basically volunteering to do lots of extra hours of work for no extra pay. I mean, these, who goes to a treatment court will spend, most of the next couple years reporting regularly to that treatment court team, including the treatment court judge, about how things are going. And if they had instead pled guilty or even gone to a jury trial, the case would have been over in no time and off the judge's docket. So it's a lot more work, and it says a lot that we have volunteers. How about Arkansas, Rhonda?
It's similar. And so, yes, the judge has to agree that they want to do it. And without that, you really can't run it. And we've had a few times where, there's been one in a district and a judge is retired, where it's like, okay, who's going to step up and run it? And there's been a few occasions where they're all like, it's too much. Our dockets are too high, that we can't take on that workload because it's such a significant extra workload for no extra money. But that's been few and far. For the most part, it's been the community needs more drug courts. The judges in the staff are willing, but there just isn't enough funding. We desperately could use more mental health and veteran courts like you have, Bridget, but we just don't have enough, haven't been able to capture the funding for them to do it. But I think the amount of time that judges spend on top of their regular caseload, it's just enormous. And you really, unless you're spending time and you've spent time in them, you don't really understand how much time that can take.
And of course, West Virginia is very similar. There's no extra pay. You don't get overtime as a judge for taking on this work. That said, our judges are incredible advocates for these programs. And once they get involved, and in describing, and Rhonda described it, how you get sort of caught up. Once they get involved, they want to stay involved. We've generally learned it is a very positive, even though difficult and time consuming and all of those things. That's how our family treatment courts have expanded pretty quickly, because judges raised their hand and said, I want one of those. And we had planned a really modest sort of up and running, and that we've started them much more quickly than we anticipated, because we just had a lot of judges who wanted to get involved and do it. So it can be a very positive thing for so many ways, not just the outcomes, but also just in terms of a judge's work. It's rewarding for our judges. But let's turn over really to the focus of treatment courts, and that is the people who are participants. Who decides, we need to talk about whether someone can participate in a drug court instead of going to jail or being tried for a crime they're charged with. And I'll kick this off. So for adult drug courts in West Virginia, the prosecutors and drug court judges have the final say in who gets to participate in the drug court. It's important to know, and I'm sure this is true across states, people who are registered as sex offenders or who have a prior felony conviction for violent crime are not eligible for drug court. Generally, the participants in adult drug court are folks who've been charged with, pled guilty to, or found guilty of misdemeanor or felony drug-related offenses. So we catch people at all of different stages of their criminal situation, not just they've been charged, not just they've pled guilty. It can happen at different parts. And when you turn it over to juvenile, that program in West Virginia is targeted to folks, and this is what you mentioned, Rhonda, how young the children are who get involved in the juvenile justice system, but we focus on juveniles 10 to 17 who are nonviolent. And then family treatment courts are a little different because those proceedings aren't criminal. Those are civil proceedings where the parent or parents face the termination of their parental rights, or essentially losing their children because of child abuse or neglect. So they can, in a family treatment court situation, get structured help for their substance abuse as part of their improvement program to try to get their kids back. But like in drug courts, the family treatment court judge has the final say as to who participates. So Rhonda, how does it work in Arkansas?
So it's very similar. And so we have some of the same sort of restrictions statutorily that, violent offenders, sex offenders are excluded from the program. But I think the selection it's really important that drug courts and the judge and the team slow down that front end selection and make sure that you're sort of getting the right people into drug court, because the slots are limited and the funding is limited. And so I will say that there are a lot of defense attorneys that try to get all their clients into drug court. And there's this misperception that it's like the get out of jail free card to go into drug court. That's not the purpose. That's not how they work. And so, drug courts aren't for someone who just, let's say, I'm using drug court as an example, but it's not for someone that just, happens to one time possess drugs and doesn't have a substance abuse problem. It doesn't need that expansive sort of wrap around team service approach because they have a significant problem, that they need that sort of lengthy 2-year breaking the addiction cycle. At the same time that you could have such a serious problem that it's not going to work either, that you're going to need more intensive, inpatient, significant rehab, that it's not going to be. So it's getting the right people into the drug court slots. And if it's like anything else, right, it's hard to break the addiction cycle if they don't want to break the addiction cycle. And so trying as a judge, I'll say from being there, it was like trying to make sure and slow that down. So it's not like, you come in, do a guilty plea and say, or sometimes it's pre-adjudication, pre-plea. We're going to go to drug court and try that. But it's like you have to really slow that process down if you're going to do it well and make sure this is the right candidate, that it's serious enough they need drug court, but not too serious that drug court's not going to be successful, and that they have the right mindset going in, and so anyway, I was just going to say that process, it really takes time to get it right. How about Michigan?
It's similar in Michigan, like West Virginia and Arkansas, and probably every state. There's a combination of factors, and there are statutory guardrails. The violent offender guardrail. There's actually that guardrail is in the federal legislation that funds. There's significant congressional funding that largely goes through the National Association of Drug Court Professionals organization. And then there are state statutory guidelines, and we also have a violent offender exclusion in Michigan, which actually there's a lot of debate around, especially with respect to mental health treatment court. It's sometimes depending, violent offender is a very broad term, and it can include lots of different people and lots of different offenses, some of which you might not have even known were violent offenses, and some of which might really be good candidates for mental health treatment courts in some instances. So some of the mental health professional community is advocating for a little bit more of a nuanced approach to that, but we can talk about that. But in the meantime, like your states, there's an addition to statutory criteria. The judge and the prosecutor have to agree that the candidate is a good candidate. And I agree with Rhonda that the candidate has to really be ready for what is a much harder process through the legal system than the alternative. That front end part of it, I think Rhonda said it really well. It's important to be careful and thoughtful because it's a hard program, and you want to make sure that the folks who sign up for it are really ready for it. And it's also resource intensive, and you want to make sure you're giving those resources to somebody who really can make the most of it. So like your state's combination of factors.
And that's an interesting thing I've learned as I've gotten more involved in knowing about treatment courts, and because I would have guessed, just as like a lay person, uninvolved, that the model for a lot of these courts is the worst of the worst, who's not a violent offender, who's not a sex offender, who's someone in pretty serious trouble, as Rhonda said, not their first offense. And I would have thought, well, we want to catch these people early and help them. But in fact, these programs are designed to work with the fact that someone might be almost at the end of their rope in terms of, facing longer incarceration or more serious harm to their already probably difficult lives. So it's kind of it seems to be a delicate balance of desperation in some ways. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way, but just as a practical matter, as with anyone who is going to start the grueling process of recovering from addiction, you have to have quite a bit of motivation or get some motivation manufactured for you. And that's what these programs can do. And so you mentioned, Bridget, the graduation is kind of the end point for all these programs, and they call it graduation, even though you don't get a degree. What is the end result? And have you ever been to a drug court graduation?
I have been to many of them. I actually find it to be one of the most satisfying things that I get to do in my job. It's pretty incredible to see lives transformed by a really hardworking trial court team, the judge included. And so I don't think I've ever said no when I've been invited to go to a treatment court graduation. In fact, there's one treatment court in one county in Michigan, a veterans treatment court, that I think I've been to the majority of their graduations. I think once you show up once, they just keep inviting you. And one time there was one in August, and my family was visiting from Los Angeles, and I brought my entire family, and my niece sang the national anthem. I literally like inserted my entire family on the veterans court graduation. That's how impactful it is, and how much it means to me. The graduations are, try and keep a dry eye, I dare you. Rhonda?
Yes, and also I see you posting on Twitter sometimes, Bridget, at the graduations, and I just think that's, phenomenal, everything you do on Twitter, but it's showing and sort of shining a light on them and the graduation and the work of the courts, I think is so important, and using, Twitter platform to shine that light is just something else spectacular that you do. So thank you for always doing that. But I'll say that, yeah, the graduations are amazing. Selfishly, they're really amazing when you've been the presiding judge. There's not a dry eye in the place. And they, usually they get, it's sort of like everybody's a valedictorian at the graduation. So if they graduate, they all give a speech, typically. I don't know if that's the ones you've been to, but when we presided, they actually wrote out a graduation speech and talked about their journey. And it just is truly, truly amazing. And I will tell you, I wanted to mention that and brag that there's one young woman that had a very serious hardcore drug problem. Not that all drugs aren't hard, but I mean, this serious. And she graduated from our drug court program, and she went on and became an addiction studies major, and graduated from college. And she's now treating other individuals with addiction issues. And so just that's what, going through the drug court saw her, that there was a need for more people in the field. So it's wonderful. I will say for sure. I'll say it's neat being on the Arkansas Supreme Court, and a pretty amazing job. But that feeling at a drug court graduation is pretty amazing as well.
And to the point of these, you guys have covered just how inspiring they are, and they are. I love going to drug court graduations. they're especially in, rural counties, they are a big event. They are a victory in the community. In these small communities, a lot of folks know these people, for good or for ill. And to watch some of these folks, step up there with their piece of paper, with their speech. These are not public speakers. These are not folks who have ever probably given a speech. Many of them have not graduated from high school or have done, GED as part of their drug court program. It is amazing to watch them just shine in the pride of their accomplishment and have their family there. The other cool thing is that in some drug courts, in one in particular in West Virginia, in Jackson County, the food is amazing. The drug court graduate gets to choose. One of our judges has a great relationship with some local catering people, and the graduate gets to choose their menu. And so it's a very popular one for judges, because for us to go to, because the food is quite something. So that's a sort of another bonus for these.
Can I tell you guys my favorite drug court, my personal drug court story that's a little bit off topic, but not exactly off topic? So, you may or may know this, but Martin Sheen, President Bartlett, was one of the very, very early supporters of the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. He literally, like 30 years ago, started figuring out how to support drug courts. He just he's someone whose family has been touched by sobriety in important ways, and he's a pretty interesting guy. He over the course of his lifetime, he once told me that anytime he gets a letter from somebody in prison or somebody in a detox facility, he always writes them back, and I happen to know that he does a lot more than that. He won't talk about it, but I know some personal stories of people he has done incredible things for. But the National Association of Drug Court Professionals honored him about, 6 or 7 years ago. And the entire cast of the West Wing showed up to support him. And they were, quite proud of him. And there's another interesting little piece of this, which is Melissa Fitzgerald, who also was on the West Wing with Martin Sheen, left her very successful career in Hollywood to be the executive director of Justice for Vets, which was the Veterans Treatment Court sort of section of the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, and still works there. She literally left Hollywood and now works full time to support drug courts. But anyway, back to my story. When Martin was getting this award, he gave this lovely speech, the way you would imagine Martin Sheen would, about how healing is not inconsistent with accountability, and that. And sort of just about the way in which we can be a force for good by being a force for healing. And he talked about somebody arriving at the gates of heaven and without any scars, and St. Peter saying to this person at the gates of heaven, like, where are your battle scars? And the person said, oh, I don't have any. And St. Peter said, well, was there nothing worth fighting for? And it was so lovely. And I've literally, I have a list of things I keep on my desktop of quotes that I like to remember. And Martin Sheen's recognition at the drug court for being a supporter of drug courts for decades without ever talking about it is just lovely.
Because that is just a perfect summary of how important these courts are, and the public recognizes they're important. It's not just all of us in the judiciary who are fired up about it, whether you're a person of fame like Martin Sheen or other people in the community who just, are believe passionately in the power of the positive outcomes that drug courts, that treatment courts, that problem-solving courts, whatever name you want to use. And it is, these graduates retain and regain their dignity, families, and lives. So if you want to know more about treatment courts, we've mentioned it a couple times, the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, NADCP, has a great website with lots of information. That's NADCP.org. You can also check out the website for your state's court system. For example, I noticed that the Arkansas website has a great 5-minute video explaining how specialty courts work, which I watched yesterday to prepare, and it was very helpful. So you can check out all those resources. This is kind of intended to be a introduction to treatment court. So maybe we've gotten you interested, and you might even think about volunteering in your local treatment court, or at least baking cookies for a graduation or something like that. So now we shall turn to our lightning round. Let's get to it. We'll answer, as always, in alphabetical state order: Arkansas, Michigan, and then West Virginia. And our first question, going to a current trend on Twitter, Wordle. Are you playing Wordle? And what's your best result so far?
So am I up? So I am playing Wordle, I think, because you two dragged me into Wordle. And I think my best is the second guess, getting it on the second guess. And it's pure luck that I was able to.
I'm definitely playing Wordle, and you're welcome, Rhonda, for dragging you into it. I once got it on 2 tries, but only once. Today it took me all 6. I found today very hard.
So best I've done is 3 tries. I'm in the middle of today's. So, and I'm at 3 already. So I'm not sure it's going very well. Sometimes I step away from it and go back, and sometimes I can figure it out. Okay, I was just asked this question on a recent podcast that I did. So I'm going to ask you guys, if you could go to dinner with anyone, excluding your family, we don't want to bother anybody, currently living, who would it be? Rhonda.
Boy, this is really tough. I think that I would go to Queen Elizabeth II. So I think that's who I'm going to pick.
I agree. This is tough. So I'll give you 2. I would like that New Zealand Prime Minister. How do you pronounce it? Jacinda Ardern. I want to go to dinner with her. She's amazing. I think she's incredible. And Lizzo. I'd like to go to dinner with Lizzo.
You can't lie. So on the podcast that I appeared on, my answer, because we were talking law, and I'm going to stick with it, was Sandra Day O'Connor. Of course, I realize she's not making public appearances, but boy, would I love to talk to her about how she got started in something that we all believe in, which is civics education. Next question, who or what, I guess, is your favorite Disney character?
Oh, without a doubt, it's Belle from Beauty and the Beast. That shouldn't surprise you guys.
Perfect.
So I'm going with Winnie the Pooh, which you might think is not a Disney character, but Winnie the Pooh definitely is a Disney character. So I don't know how you beat that, Beth.
So mine is obscure, but I love him anyway. His name is Figment, and he's a purple dragon, figment of your imagination. He was an Epcot little character, and now he's really obscure, and you have to go on eBay to find a Figment thing, but I still have my little purple dragon stuffed animal from when I was younger. And looking ahead for Valentine's Day, would you rather receive candy or flowers or something else?
Oh, without a doubt, candy. Give me chocolates any day.
Yeah, definitely if it's between chocolate and flowers, I want chocolate. No, easy. But maybe like get me a massage. Just saying, if my husband happens to be listening.
And I am going to say flowers, and also disclose, sadly, that in a conversation with my husband yesterday, I learned that he has not listened to a single episode of Lady Justice Women of the Court. So maybe for Valentine's Day, I could wish for that. And with that, I know.
He's an attorney. He went to law school.
I understand. We're working up to it. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for listening. Check us out on all social media platforms, all podcast platforms. We appreciate all of our listeners and look forward to coming back again soon. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Lady Justice, Women of the Court. To learn more about this podcast, access past episodes, or find links to our social media, visit ladyjusticepod.com. There, you can also record a voice message with a question or comment. The opinions expressed on the program are the justices alone and do not necessarily reflect the views of their respective courts. Until next time.